Hi everyone. Let's do one more video. I hope one more video and no more after this about beta readers, that topic. And if I have to do more videos afterward, I will. But this one's inspired by a comment that was left on Journal 93. That was the beta reader journal. And I enjoyed reading it, not because it agreed with me. I mean, I'll read it. I'll show it to you. It clearly does not agree with me. And not because I agree with it. As you watch this, you'll notice how little agreement I have with the comment, but it inspires further discussion. I'm a professor by trade. I love deep dives, exploring topics from a number of different perspectives. I think we all grow and learn when we do that, and it's just an idea and we put it up for scrutiny, and I love doing that. Or at least I enjoy very much doing that. And so that's what I'm going to do here. Let me show you the comment first. Let me pull it up. Okay. I think you have a very different view of the social contract with beta readers than I do. You are presupposing that an author who uses beta readers somehow magically loses control of the process of writing. Your examples are amusing, but I find them rhetorically not helpful since I cannot imagine any artist worth their salt doing what you represent. As someone who literally teaches creative writing, the fostering of the proper relationship between a writer and their beta readers, should they choose to use them, is important. If it went like you portray, it would be a disaster. But you know what? If you are my beta reader and say something that clearly shows me you didn't actually read my piece with any consideration or clarity, I am shockingly not going to pay attention. However, and this is what you are missing, if you as a reader bring me a piece of perspective that I didn't consider, and if I believe you're interested in making the story better, I'll listen. I may not adopt your recommendation, I am not required to do so, but I might think about the reader who thinks differently than I do, not for business reasons, but because I accept that my writing the story is a necessary but not comprehensive part of the experience of the reader out in the world. I don't know your work, just got lured in by the title, so well done on that front. And then I responded, pretty much immediately I responded and said, thanks for watching. I invite differences of opinion and I'm interested in reading them. Where do you teach? Because he said he literally teaches creative writing. And there's no response. I waited like a week or whatever. And then I said, it sounds like we both work in academia. If you're interested, I'd be happy to have a friendly Zoom discussion on the topic, put our ideas up for scrutiny. Could be a rewarding conversation for us and others. And again, no comment, no response to that one either. So this is a conversation I was hoping to have live. I am not going to write it. My thoughts are way too long here. No one would ever read it. But I was hoping it wouldn't be a monologue. I'm going to do my solo act, but I was hoping to have an actual conversation with this person because reading the comment, he strikes me as very bright, knowledgeable about this subject, thoughtful, sincere. I think it would have been good conversation, not as like a semi-anonymous, attacky message that you just send off and never check in on. That's not useful for anybody. But an actual, like we're in our respective rooms, but basically here together in real time, using our mouths to talk to each other, where if we put an idea forward and it's a little bit reckless, it could be contradicted. It could just be leveled by the other person. It probably would be. And so we're so much more like generous with the other person's points, cautious with our own. Settings like that, these debate situations, I think lead to much more academic conversations, and that's what I was hoping to have. It doesn't seem like my invitation was on the brink of being accepted, thus, here cometh the monologue, but it's still, I haven't rescinded it. It still stands. I'm happy to have this discussion, and I invite contradictory opinions and positions, and because I am not my ideas. I have ideas, I have opinions, but I think when people believe that contradiction is a form of, condemnation, and like disagreement is disparagement. I don't think that. I'm happy to have my ideas be contradicted and to have disagreements. I think that's beneficial. I think it makes me a better person. I think it makes everyone a better person. I wish the world would become better. But I see in public, when I'm looking at conversations, that's the kind of thing that I see where if people's ideas are not perfectly aligned, they get upset. So like, let's say two people are having a conversation. There's person A and there's person B. And let's say person B makes their opinion known about something. The most inconsequential, like trivial opinion ever. If person A then says something that convincingly contradicts it, person B, in my experience, in my observation, will respond defensively almost every time. Often this happens in the second person. That's the part I find weirdest, a bunch of you statements. And then if there isn't a compelling counter argument, if person B can't really argue his or her way out of this, credentials start being declared. I encounter this all the time. If the point is too feeble to stand on its own, accolades, that gets declared, or other forms of authority. That's wielded in the place of compelling facts and reason. I mean, especially where I see this is in medical situations. If a physician says something that is just so wildly false, happens all the time. It was thought to be true in the 80s, but by 1992, nobody thought this to be true in the medical literature. And I am sort of blunt force trauma struck with fictions. I will delicately contradict those positions because it's meaningful to my health. And in those situations, the physician feels threatened, and instead of making a valid point or moving their own opinion, they declare their credentials. I'm the doctor in the room. I have heard so many times. And well, technically, I don't make this point in the room because it wouldn't be helpful, but technically doctor really means teacher. I am not a physician, so you are the physician in the room. I mean, I could go on with my argument, but I never do because it just wouldn't be helpful. But all that does is telegraph insecurity. When people retaliate with credentials and talk in the second person and stuff, this is just telegraphing insecurity. And in the present case, you are presupposing that an author who uses beta readers somehow magically loses control of the process of writing. I didn't do that at all, actually. It's not even close to true. At no point in what I was saying in my writing did I indicate that. I mean, beyond beta readers, even a formal editor doesn't steal autonomy from the writer. So these claims aren't addressing anything I said. I was on to say, your examples are amusing, thank you, but I find them rhetorically not helpful since I cannot imagine any artist worth their salt doing what you represent. All right, let's start with semantics. Let's rewind a few seconds, and I'm sitting in a medical appointment, and I hear, I'm the only doctor in this room. Again, doctor, that's Latin for teacher, and this person doesn't teach and I teach, so in a lexical sense, I'm the only doctor in the room. Again, I would never say that. But let's do a similar etymology here. So fast forward to the present, and worth one's salt. What does that mean? Salary comes from the Latin salt money. And so worth one's salt means, is it worth pay? The job you're doing, the task you're doing, should you be compensated for it with a salary, with pay? And the entire point I was making is that true art should come from the heart, and it should not be done with financial incentives. That was it. I even said that beta readers are great for people who are trying to make money, trying to earn their salt money. I mean, I quote myself, if business is your principal concern, I get it. But for those who care about the heart, right, rather than financial like remuneration, or as I put it in my journal, commercial viability, that's where I'm opposed to creation by committee. I mean, especially in the age of AI, where heart and humanity, these are the only indispensable features of art we have left. And so I don't know what to make of the salt money comment, because it seems to be just making my argument for me. I mean, it was stated in sort of an antagonizing tone, but it really agrees with my point. Almost fully, there's one point of disagreement that I would acknowledge, which I do think David Bowie and Tchaikovsky did deserve their money, for their art. And so the amusing examples I gave were their quotations. So the line, I cannot imagine any artist worth their salt doing what you represent. I don't think what I represented requires any imagination. I'll leave it up to the consensus of the public, but the artists who do it were on the page, so I don't think anyone needed to imagine anything. Although maybe the premise was that Tchaikovsky and Bowie didn't deserve any compensation for their work. I don't think that's what the point was, but hypothetically, let's say it was. Now we can use our imaginations and come up with some additional names of people who behaved that way. We're going to have to go beyond musicians, because if I were to make a video naming every musician who produces art with this philosophy, I would run out of hard drive space before I finish that list. But if you do want to start, just do one more or start that journey, I would say go with my favorite band of all time, R.E.M. They're one of the best examples of this philosophy. But let's go beyond music. Let's get into writers, and specifically writers who achieved success, earned their salt money without using the standard beta reader process. But before I go through those examples, let's just return to the comment and use that to guide where this discussion is going to go. If it went like you portray, it would be a disaster. But you know what? If you are my beta reader and say something that clearly shows me you didn't actually read my piece with any consideration or clarity, I am shockingly not going to pay attention. Let's take a trip back to our person A, person B scenario, where when people communicate in the second person, like this, it's almost always hostility for hostility's sake, and that almost always weakens the argument, because it could just say, if a reader doesn't put forth much effort into comprehension, the writer is unlikely to assign as much value to their comments, something like that. But instead it says, if you were my beta reader and you didn't read it with any consideration, I am shockingly not going to pay attention. Yes, I'm not sure why it suddenly became about me, because I feel like this could have been a great conversation. This strikes me as a very smart person on this topic, and we could have made some ground and both benefited. But this feels like angry stabbing at an enemy. When people just stab bitterly, angrily at an opponent, it just dulls the point pretty much every time. But since it is about me, I'll address the accusation. I do consider things pretty thoroughly. I do the deep dive whenever I read them. This is just a comment. I mean, you should see me when I'm reading a book, how thoroughly my underlinings are. And so in addition to dulling the point, I feel like the angry stabbing maybe missed the mark with me. But the point being made is this. If it went like you portray, it would be a disaster. I don't think that's true, because there's way too many examples where it went like how I portray, and the result was a great triumph in the arts. I mean, we can begin with the most successful, influential books of all time. I mean, certainly the most read and widely distributed, and that's the religious texts. I mean, those definitely didn't go through a gauntlet of beta read. I mean, I'm sure some scribes made manipulations over the years, some translators took liberties, so there are some councils, Nicaea, et al. I mean, those got involved, but that's not under the control of the original writers. I mean, the point of relevance is that the original work inspired those scribes, inspired those translators and other readers. I mean, to the point of life-defining devotion, despite not having a standard beta reader and there's other early works too. I mean, something like Pilgrim's Progress. I probably didn't have any beta readers. Canterbury Tales probably didn't have any beta. I mean, like Chaucer wasn't even consistent in how he spelled his words. Some of that like rhyming, but fast forward the world a couple of centuries and we get to Shakespeare. And he didn't have a traditional editorial process either, and he seems to have avoided disaster. I mean, for playwrights in that age, not even the actors themselves had full scripts to beta read. They had cue scripts, which contained all the actor's lines, the individual actor, but almost nothing else. There's just a few words preceding their line. If you didn't have that, it actually would be a disaster, but that's all they had, a few words leading into their lines. And the entire purpose of doing a cue script like that was to keep the full script out of everyone's hands, so they wouldn't be sold to another playhouse. But it's kind of hard to do a beta read if no one's getting a full script. Now, I'm not arguing that Shakespeare didn't make revisions based on audience response, but that's precisely the kind of revision I've been praising, that I've praised in the past. In my progress update from March 2025, I described how musicians beta test their songs, playing it in front of an audience and then feeling the audience energy in like a vague but meaningful way, and then letting that be a source of nutrition for the muse. This is the same approach David Sedaris takes, and I've praised him in the past, and I've seen this firsthand. I've seen David Sedaris live multiple times, and so I've watched him do this version of revision. He takes his work on stage and then performs it out loud in front of a live audience, and he notices how the crowd responds. Something is connecting, if it isn't connecting, maybe the pacing is off, people laugh or they clap, sometimes they cough. He talks about people coughing, and you can just feel if something is or isn't right, and then he makes little notes as he reads. He's reading and making little notes as he goes, and no one else is making notes. There's no audience member making notes or suggestions. They're just laughing and clapping and maybe coughing, and they're not beta audiencing either. They paid to be there to hear the performance, and they're being treated to a concert in the exact same way that musicians play their new songs in front of a crowd and then feel the audience response. But after David Sedaris and the musicians, when their show is over, they don't go step into the crowd and ask them for feedback. Well, you're my beta audience, and I would like to, solicit some feedback on how you think I did. They don't do that. It's just all about the feeling that they get. And I do the same thing when I'm reading my book, mostly just to Marie. And so it's like an intimately small audience, and I'm feeling the highs and the lows and the energy, and that allows me to see it in a different way, in a way that I wouldn't have seen it just reading it to myself. If you invite someone into your living room, you know exactly what your living room looks like, but you'll see it differently as soon as they step inside. Someone knocks on your door and open it up and invite them inside, and then maybe there's socks on the floor, there's a crooked picture, maybe there's a dish out or something. Suddenly those invisible things become visible to you, and that is the beta testing process that I value, and tons of writers do. Between Shakespeare and David Sedaris, there have been tons of people who do it. Tolkien is one of them. He didn't do a traditional beta reading approach either. I understand it. I wasn't there, but apparently C.S. Lewis was a sounding board. And then other than that, he just read his work to his kids. I guess Robert Jordan was similar in that he didn't have a traditional beta reader structure. I don't really connect with the Wheel of Time books, but I do connect with his process because his wife was his editor, and I think she was Harvard educated. She was an editor by trade. But the part that I really connect with is the muse was contained within the home with Robert Jordan. Then there's Oscar Wilde. He wrote most of my favorite sentences ever, and he didn't have a traditional beta reader structure either. I know there was people he was bouncing ideas off, people close to him he'd bounce ideas off of. The public was debating his work. I'm sure that had an influence over at least his future work, if not revisions of his plays. I know he was sorting out his thoughts in public, refining his ideas in conversation. So you'd have a conversation with somebody, test out ideas, and that would appear in his later writing. But that's what everyone does. That's not beta reading. That's just being a human. George Orwell had that line about likening creativity to the wild animal, it seldom breeds in captivity. I'm paraphrasing, it went something like that. Not everyone has written in that way. I read about Fitzgerald somewhere, how I think probably later in his career, he was saving his best line. He'd come up with a sentence, a turn of phrase, some little epiphany, and instead of debuting it in conversation, he would withhold it and write it later. And I don't remember where I read that. It's probably in the correspondence book, but as he described it, he's in conversation and he's just reluctant to let those ideas free. He would document them for later use in his writing. And it was profound to me because I do this. I was already doing the same thing when I read that. So I just felt like I had a companion. Now, sometimes I'll be in conversation and I used to just test everything I said first before I would write it down, just to see if it was landing. And then once I was confident enough, I started doing this. But sometimes I'll be in conversation and I'll withhold a line like, oh, this is too good. I can't just release it now. It has to be original when I put it out so that people close to me, it's like, oh, I've heard it before. And by the time I get to a pen or pencil paper or whatever, I've forgotten to write it down. And so now I didn't get to use it at all. But the point is, there's 1,000 stories of triumph in the arts that didn't use a standard beta reader process. And with poetry, it's all poetry isn't using a beta reader process. And some of the charm is the mistakes you see in the poetry. I watched this Billy Corgan interview. He was talking about his book of poetry, which I love. It's called Blinking with Fists. And he was describing it as imperfect because it's an honest reflection of him and he's an imperfect person, is how he described. That's like, it's humane, but that's what art is. Now, sometimes it's funnier than it is charming with other examples. Like Robert Browning's Pippa Passes, right at the end, he has this line about twats. He pronounces it twats, so it rhymes with bats, but he didn't know what the word meant. And so he seems to have thought it meant those veils that nuns wear. And I guarantee beta readers, if you had some beta readers for that, they would have picked up on it and he would have changed it accordingly as opposed to publish it. But that poetry doesn't go through a beta filter is what makes it authentic. I mean, sometimes it's silly, right? In the Robert Browning sense, it's silly, but it makes it beautiful too. And the same is true with novels. I mean, just imagine like a confederacy of dunces, Tristram Shandy, Ulysses. Imagine these undergoing like a contemporary beta reader process. And now I'm sure all of these writers solicited advice on parts of their work, asked experts, questions when necessary. They read it to friends, they gauged their response, but they didn't do the like worth one's salt beta reader structure that people participate in today. I just don't think that process, the very rigid, beta reading process, is producing better work than Shakespeare, better work than like Oscar Wilde and Tolkien and every poet ever. Calling it a disaster doesn't feel like a careful handling of the subject. It feels more like an emotional outburst. And I do think that both sides of the argument, I'll say, I'm representing one side of an argument, that we both have an opportunity to gain and lose ground, to learn something. And I think a conversation would have been much better to the benefit of everybody. But that opportunity didn't really come about. So my monologue instead. But let me just end sort of where I began with all of this, of what is art. And I think it's a very, very, very authentic personal expression. I think that's what art is. If it gets adulterated in the interest of salt money, a financial gain of remuneration, if you're changing the authenticity or the personal expression for that, yeah, I think that necessarily tempers the art in that. And no, if the goal is money, if the goal is I need a mortgage and whatever, yes, invite all the beta readers in that you possibly can. I get it. I've never been against that. I just think having beta readers helping you do the polishing buffs the soul right out of it. Because I think the soul of art is irrationality. I mean, just devoting yourself fully to something that makes no rational sense. Commitment against reason. That's what art is. I mean, commitment to reason is science. It's sound in entertainment, at least, it's sound economics and good business. And that's where I feel like beta readers belong. That's where their enormous value is in business. I've never believed or implied otherwise. I just don't think they're great for art, but that's my opinion. It doesn't have to be your opinion. We all get to believe what we want to believe. And again, person A and person B should just get along even when their opinions differ. My wish for you, my departing wish, is that whatever your opinion is can be strengthened by contrasting views, and it can be more and more rewarding, and it can bolster our belonging, I don't have a good ending for this. I'm just going to wave and say, I'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.